Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our panel on post-secondary students, mental health, and success in academics. It is my honor to be here with all of you. My name is Dr. Thessalin Alani-Burgi. I am the founder of Silm Center for Mental Health, and I am a clinical psychologist. But today is not about me even a little bit. I am so excited to introduce you to our wonderful panel. So maybe when I say your name, you can give a little wave, even though your names are underneath there. So our first panelist is Nabiha Rattansi. Nabiha is a registered social worker with over 10 years of experience working with children and adolescents within a strength-based framework. Nabiha believes preventative strategies are essential when navigating through difficult situations and the stresses in life. She has a particular interest in supporting individuals experiencing anxiety, depression, self-esteem, and stress. Nabiha recently completed her master's in social work. Congratulations, Nabiha. Our next panelist is Karen Smith. Karen is a registered social worker and has a background in mental health, addictions, and delivering social service supports to improve the quality of life for communities. She is engaging, collaborative, and creates a safe, inclusive space to build therapeutic partnerships with clients. Karen is committed to helping people achieve well-being by exploring their strengths, building resilience, and recognizing their ability to make positive change. So glad to have you here, Karen. Our last panelist is Natalie Blake. Natalie is a registered social worker who completed a Master of Social Work with a focus in mental health. She has extensive experience supporting people from diverse backgrounds who have encountered significant personal and professional challenges. In addition to her role as a therapist with Silm, Natalie is also a full-time professor in human services at a prominent college in Toronto. With 10 years experience as an educator, she has an in-depth knowledge and expertise of the varying dynamics of the student experience, including supporting and advising students, as well as advocating for students of all ages. She believes that each student has immense potential and promise and is excited to be a part of each student's academic journey. She is passionate about her calling as both therapist and educator. Thank you so much for being here, Natalie. And finally, our tremendously awesome moderator is Kelsey Franklin. Kelsey recently completed a Master of Global Health specializing in health management. She has a passion for mental health and is currently working in both the private and public sector, learning about the various mental health supports that are available in the province. She believes that mental health is an understated and essential part of the overall health of a person and hopes to make a difference by improving access to mental health supports, especially in marginalized communities. Thank you so much for being here today, Kelsey. I will pass it on to you to take us away on this webinar.
Great, thank you, Thessa. So we're just going to start off with a few questions that students may have. The first, I'll pass it over to Nabiha. As a student, I'm saying that I'm experiencing anxiety. Are there any coping tools that I can try on my own?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, anxiety can manifest in many different ways. Some of the most common symptoms of anxiety are heart palpitations, stomach aches, feeling physically sick, sweating, constantly thinking about everything from a negative perspective, loss of interest in activities that were previously enjoyed, feeling nervous or tense, physically shaking, trouble concentrating, and constant worry. The best coping tools for anxiety are grounding exercises. So engaging in grounding exercises will enable you to focus on or ground you in the present moment instead of on a past or a future event. Grounding techniques can help to give you back a sense of control when you are feeling overwhelmed. So some of the basic grounding techniques can include belly breathing, body scans, the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. So I'll just walk you through it really quickly. So acknowledging or identifying 5 things that you see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. I also really like counting backwards from 100 by 7. It gets people completely grounded in what's going on.
Great, thank you so much. Natalie, I'll pass it over to you now. So I have a learning disability or a difference, or I think I may have one. Where would I go to get support?
Thanks for that, Kelsey. So yes, there are students who may feel like there's something different in my learning, especially coming from high school into post-secondary. So I often always share with students, the best thing to do is to reach out to one of their professors and just to get support, or even to reach out to the program coordinator. And just to share, it's really about being comfortable, being vulnerable, sharing something really personal, but this is something that will be able to support a student along their academic journey. So at the college I teach at, and at various colleges, universities, there's something called accessible learning services. Now, they all may have different names, but the primary goal or service is to ensure that a student is connected to a consultant, and that consultant will schedule an appointment with the student once the student has reached out, and in that appointment, be able to assess them. So to look at what are some of their learning challenges or learning differences, the uniqueness of their learning as well. And so that is the first step in reaching out to one of these organizations or services. And at where I am, it's Accessible Learning Services. And then from there, the student can receive the supports they need in terms of, say, a learning accommodation. Now, some students who are from high school, they may already recognize that, or they may have something called an IEP, Individualized Education Program. And so that can be very foundational for when you're in college, university, to give to that consultant, and that can be the stepping stone to supporting that student in a formalized assessment to get the supports that they need. So it's a first scary step for some students. I've walked students through this before. And all my first day with all my students and all my classes, I talk about the fact that every college university provides an inclusive learning environment. And I actually say to my students, if you feel like you learned differently in high school, but you never had it formalized and now you're here, I encourage you to reach out to Accessible Learning Services. And I actually had a student who came to me after that first class and said, you know what, Miss, they call me Miss sometimes. Miss, I think there's something different in the way I learn, and I've just always been embarrassed or had low self-esteem about it. And I supported her. We went to the Accessible Learning Services and she was able to get the supports she needed for her learning accommodation.
That's great. Thank you so much, Natalie. So the great thing about our panel is that they all have experience with students. So does anyone have anything else that they wanted to add, maybe about accessibility or things that you've come across in your practice? Karen?
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that I've noticed in working with students who have experienced disability or even with clients is really impacting their self-esteem and sometimes even leading to social anxiety, where they're really concerned about how whether or not people are judging them. And I think that, one of the important things to remember, is really about learning differently. And that we do have, environments where we have the supports that we need to and still be successful. And I think that that's an important takeaway for students, that you can still learn in a different way, but you can still be successful in school.
Awesome. So in saying that, I know people also have a lot of other difficulties. So say a student is having trouble balancing school, work, family, and social connections, and it's causing them stress. How would you suggest that they manage this?
Yeah, thanks. I hear this a lot from students as well, that are trying to balance everything in their lives at a very important time when they are in post-secondary school. And one of the things I talk about in my class with students is the importance of practicing self-care. And self-care really means taking care of yourself so you can be healthy, you can do well, you can do your job, you can do all the things you need to do and still accomplish and be successful in your day. Self-care can help us cope with daily stressors and help us achieve that balance that we're looking for in work, in school, and family. It can be hard to wind down and slow down, which can make you feel even more anxious and overwhelmed by even doing simplest of tasks. So self-care generally is anything that puts a smile on your face and anything that brings you joy, anything that makes you feel cared for, even if it's really caring about yourself. So when we talk about self-care, we mean that it's ways in which we take care of ourselves, both emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And emotional self-care can include things such as self-talk and using self-compassion, saying no to things that cause us unnecessary stress, and giving yourself permission to take a pause and take mini breaks throughout the day. Or it could be mean setting up a weekly coffee date with a friend so that you could talk. And some of the physical self-care practices you could do is prioritizing your sleep, which is really hard as a student, but getting on a regular sleep schedule can make a world of difference for you. Adopting an exercise routine that you actually like and enjoy and that you will do, which will help release that stress from your body. Choosing healthy, nourishing foods and drinking plenty of water are some really simple things you could do for self-care for your physical self. For spiritual self-care, it could be attending a religious service if that's something that you do, spending time in nature, meditating, and keeping a gratitude journal. So many common self-care practices have been known to improve health outcomes and can really help us balance our lives.
I 100% agree. Self-care is so important. As Taslim said, I just finished school as well. So I definitely practiced some of that. Anything that kind of made me happy. I had to take a break, step away from the computer, especially in a virtual environment. And I just found hobbies and just things to kind of take my brain off of school. Does anyone else have any other self-care tips or practices that they personally like to employ when they're, feeling a little stressed?
Something I can add. I mean, self-care for me, one of my go-tos is walking. So I walk every day in the morning, especially between classes, and I can do that more online. So I think too, for students who are learning online or learning on campus, to always try to still implement self-care. It's really transcends any kind of learning environment that you're in. And also I think to add to Karen, I think what can be helpful is maybe even having a self-care accountability partner. So someone who's checking in like, okay, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you go for your walk? Or did you, drink lots of water? How was your water intake? It's something so simple, but I think especially because we do really well when we're more connected to other people than doing things in isolation. And with this pandemic, there's such a pronounced sense of isolation. So it's really important, I think, to check in with someone and have sort of like a buddy who you're keeping on track with and they're keeping on track with you. I think it's really helpful, irrespective of a student's discipline. I mean, in our backgrounds, we're in social work, but I think in any discipline of study, it's really important to learn to take care of yourself. And it's not a selfish thing. Sometimes it might appear to be that way to other folks who may not understand it, or it's sometimes misunderstood. Self-care is absolutely taking care of yourself, because when you can take care of yourself, if others are depending on you, if you're a mature student, have kids, well, you need to be able to take care of yourself so you can take care of your kids or your family. So really important to be able to do that and have a buddy. It's nice to do things in pairs as well.
Thanks, Natalie. So I know it's a lot easier said than done, practicing self-care and balancing school and everything. So Nabiha, if students are having trouble getting everything done and they kind of feel behind, what would you kind of suggest that they do?
So I've worked with a lot of university students, fresh to university, some in their fourth year, who are feeling very overwhelmed. And we've created a kind of schedule for them, putting in things that are non-negotiable into your schedule, like your classes. I'm also going to piggyback on the self-care question and throw in some self-care every day, right? Like I say, try to do one good thing for yourself every day that makes you smile, whether it's in the morning, like Natalie said, taking a walk, or, just spending some time doing something for yourself at the end of the night as well. I think it's really important to remember to set aside enough time to actually stay on top of your readings. That's the biggest thing. I've worked with students and they're like, 6 weeks in, I'm so behind, right? Then they start from scratch and now they're 6 weeks behind again. So trying to stay on top of it. When it comes to major assignments, using like a calendar and working backwards, right? Figuring out when your deadline is and breaking up the assignment into chunks can be really helpful. Like I'm going to have a third of my paper done by this day and move backwards as well. Another thing, like I said, if somebody is 6 weeks behind, try not to fall even further behind, right? Don't start from the beginning. Try to catch up from where you are. And if you need to, speak to your professor. A lot of them are really understanding, especially with, all the mental health that is coming out, especially because of the pandemic. So don't feel like you have to start from the beginning. And just remember, managing your time is a skill. Like I find a lot of adults are still having challenges trying to develop this. So remember that it takes time, you'll get there, and, don't give up.
Amazing advice. Does anyone else want to add on to that, kind of what they've done or advise their students to do when they kind of feel like they're falling behind in school? Karen?
Yeah, I would just say, I love the idea of keeping schedules and finding different ways that work for you. Because I think for some students, they get overwhelmed even thinking about a schedule. And so, figuring out what that model would look like for you, whether it's post-it notes on your wall in your room or something on your phone. So I think that's a great idea. But also to not be so hard on yourself if you can't really keep up. And I think that that's one of the things that sort of compounds the situation, and give yourself, some space to kind of get there and to continue to stay positive through it is also a challenge, but also really important too when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Thanks, Karen. Natalie, did you have something to add?
Yes, you saw me unmute, so yeah, good catch, awesome. I didn't want to interrupt, such a good flow. But also in terms of that, I know students are coming out, a lot of students are coming out from high school into university, college. And so there's no manual on like college, university 101. This is what it's all about. It's really the everyday. And so some students who may have had really good, say, time management and preparation skills in high school, it might look so different because it's such a different environment. So just to piggyback on what my colleagues have shared, and like being compassionate to yourself is important, and being realistic, like, okay, I'm in a new space, post-secondary is a whole new ball game. And so just trying to sort of capitalize on the skills you've already had, but also accessing support. So I know when I talked about learning accommodations, again, like sometimes being vulnerable can be hard for people to ask for help, but it's so important. You don't want to do things on your own and suffer in silence. So one big aspect that can help is in some schools, I imagine some programs, I know in my program, we have a student support advisor. They may have different titles in various programs in various schools, but that person is meant to be a go-to support for students in a particular program. And so that person, like I'll reference to in my program, we call them SSA for short, so student support advisor. If I have a student who's having challenges in studying or time management, procrastination, I will support them the best I can, but then I also like to collaborate with our SSA. That person plugs into a lot of the services on campus. So we have a lot of workshops that are offered to students to help them manage your time, procrastination, how to study for an exam. So there are so many great resources available to students to support them in developing these skills, because these skills are actually going to help them in future practice, no matter what their field is. So again, tapping into your professor or actually your program coordinator, wherever you feel comfortable connecting with someone, your student support advisor, and really accessing those great services at your college or university.
Amazing. Thank you, Natalie. So I have another question for you. So we know obviously academics are a huge part of school, but also the social aspect is also an important part of the student experience. So if you want to connect with other students, particularly in online classes, how would you go about navigating making these connections?
Thanks, Kelsey. So having taught online for a year, one important thing that's very different than being in person is that you lose that physical presence, like being together in the same physical space. And so one thing that I encourage students to do is when I put them into breakout groups to do, like, say, group activity, or if another professor does it, any class where they put into groups, one key and very important aspect, it's very simple, is turn your camera on. Like, it's so simple. get to see people and get to connect with them. So like how we're all here together, it's so wonderful. We can all see each other. It just adds to that connection. And especially if you're a student who is online, you don't have the in-person experience with your classmates, your colleagues, or your professor, really just say, you know what, I'm going to practice this, turn my camera on there. That facial connection is so important. So I encourage that. And then when you get to see another student or other students, say in a classroom or a couple of other classes, then when it comes time to say working together in groups, that kind of can reduce the anxiety of doing group work. I know students, infamously some, do not like to work in groups, but a lot of careers call for that. To work in groups. So really important. I also had students this year, they actually started an Instagram post and they were just saying, do you want to join my Instagram? And we could sort of do an Instagram just for our program. So first year student Instagram, I'm not an Instagram, so IGs, I don't know what they call it, but like Instagram posting and following and all of that. And I found that was so good because they're really trying to connect with each other beyond seeing a Black screen. Like no one wants to see a Black screen. It's not very encouraging, even for professors. It's nice to see students. So really trying to put yourself out there and to connect. If you don't want to be known, then no one will know you. You really have to just say, I'm going to take this chance and get to know students and just show your camera and smile, and you'll know there'll be other students you want to connect with as well. So that's my advice, especially in this online realm. It is very possible to connect. Just put the effort in.
That is amazing advice. Karen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, that's great, Natalie. I think that's great, great suggestions. One things that I have had in my class, because I also teach at a college in social work as well, is my class started a WhatsApp group, and they took the initiative to do that because they recognize they really need to support each other in a virtual learning environment. So I think that that's a great way to take initiative and to do that. I've also had other students talk about, when it comes to feeling lonely, dealing with loneliness, living away from home for the first time can be really hard in terms of like knowing how to build those social connections. And they talked about joining a sports team at school. They often talked about joining a club, something that interests you. That sort of broadens your network, and knowing how to connect with people can be really challenging, but putting yourself out into those particular areas can really help you build really important connections when you're in post-secondary school.
Sorry, I just wanted to also add that I know that it can be very lonely. And I think, like you mentioned, Karen, joining clubs can be really important, especially when you're joining clubs of similar interests, right? That's a great way to meet people, and it might make you feel less intimidated.
If I could just share something quickly. So I had students share with me, this is online teaching. They shared with me that they were put into a group for one of the courses I taught. I put them into the group, and I always would encourage them, show your camera. So I always said, I'm going to sound like a broken record, and that's okay. I'll keep on saying it. And they shared with me that after that one course, which ended in, 3 months later in the semester, the next class, the next semester, they actually ended up forming a study group. So they actually bonded through virtual connections and formed a study group. And I think that's nice because that too can create friendships that we may not realize can happen in the virtual space. So just to share that too, like the power of working in groups and making the effort to connect with people is really important.
I definitely agree. I experienced all of that over the course of my degree. And, just as you said, turning on the camera was so important. It's very hard to connect with just Black screens. So I definitely agree with all of those suggestions. So thank you to our panelists. Now we'll just go into a question and answer. Sorry, that's my dog. A question and answer portion. So we have some questions from the audience. And if anyone else wants to jump in at any time, or if they have a question, they can put it in the chat. But I'll just read off the first one. So Someone said I think I have some struggles with my learning, but I'm afraid of being discriminated against. What can I do?
So thank you to the person that shared that. So as I was sharing earlier, definitely how you feel is very common. You're not alone in that feeling. I have supported students who've had those same hesitations. They've felt a sense of judgment, discrimination. And I think it speaks to a place of maybe in high school or another learning space where you didn't feel maybe included and just not understood. So being misunderstood can happen as well. So again, if you're comfortable, you should reach out to one of your professors. Usually students feel comfortable connecting with one of their professors and just sharing that I feel like I might learn differently, but I have a hesitation in getting supports. Being vulnerable, as I said, is really, really hard. And I think we can all say we've been vulnerable and it's tough, but I think taking that first step is helping you to get the supports that you need. And so at your school, they should have a service for those students who learn differently, and they may have a different name, but where I teach it, it's Accessible Learning Services. And then that's where you will be connected to a consultant. This consultant is trained in supporting people who learn differently or who have learning disabilities, however it's called, but however you see it. So they're fully trained. You will meet with that person. You'll go through, I don't know the formal process, but you go through formal assessments. Then it's determined what your learning difference is. And then once there's a confirmation of your learning difference, then your professors will receive a letter, and where I teach is called a memo of disability. So I received this memo. This memo will say that this is a student's name, their student ID, and this student requires X, Y, or Z. So it'll be a list of their learning accommodations. So what are some examples of learning accommodations? The student in this formality that the assessment they received, they may need to have extra time on a test or an exam or a quiz. They may need to have one test a day. So especially during the midterm period and the finals exam period, there might be 2 or 3 exams you might have in one day. And so to support a student's learning difference, that might mean the student can only have one test a day. So those are just different aspects. For some students, note taking. So I've had it in my classroom where I receive the memo and then I'll have a note taker, someone trained in note taking, who's taking notes for the student during the lecture class, online and in person classes. So depending on what your learning difference is, that your learning accommodations will be able to support that. But the first step is just speaking to your professor, speaking to your program coordinator. I did mention a student support advisor. It could be another name of where your school is. That's like a student ambassador, if I can call it that. So really reaching out to one person, or even contacting Accessible Learning Services yourself if you like. Absolutely. And then scheduling an appointment. They are there to support students 100% to make sure that it's an inclusive learning environment.
So would you say if there's ever a professor who is not honoring the accommodations, where would a student seek? I know you mentioned some of the other supports. So should they go to accessibility services?
Yeah, so that's like for a professor not to honor, that's not acceptable, but I'm sure it's in the minority, I imagine, and it can happen. That's a really good question. So if the student is sensing or realizes that the professor is not honoring the learning accommodations, they'll be assigned to a consultant. So they speak to the consultant and say, you know what, I asked, they know they have my accommodation. I do need more time on an essay, and they can receive accommodations for extra time without academic penalty. Speak to your consultant, and that will have to be resolved, because we don't want any student to ever have a barrier in being successful in their learning. And we accept the fact that people learn differently, and it's really important that we're also unique. So that's really important to be aware of.
Thanks, Natalie. Karen, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think what Natalie shares is so great. I had a similar experience, a student in my class as well that, was having a hard time of knowing when to come forward and get the services. And so, we had talked about the fact that he's actually paying for a service and he's entitled to have these supports. and that it takes a certain level of self-advocacy to be able to reach out and say, I need some assistance with this. Because that's what you need to be successful. And so once that kind of happens, similar to the school that I'm at, the professors actually get a letter, as Natalie had shared. And then I get a chance to actually reach out to the student and have a conversation about what they're experiencing and ways in which I could help to support. And I trust that other, instructors and professors would do the same thing, because really this is about building a partnership. We want to see students succeed as well. So we're there to support.
If I can just add something as well. If a professor doesn't understand something on the memo or the letter, they can always reach out to the consultant. I've been in that space where there was an accommodation that was really new for me. I wasn't very familiar. And so I reached out to the consultant, and it was we had like a 1 hour meeting. Really, I like the usage of the word Karen said, partnering, like we're partnering with the student, we're partnering with the accessible learning services as well. But even professors, we may not understand it, and it's for us to make sure we understand what the learning accommodation is, so that we can fulfill and provide that service to our students.
And I know that students have other difficulties, specifically with just mental health. Are there accommodations for those difficulties, or is it just learning?
So usually for the years I've been teaching, it's normally around learning accommodations. But we know that sometimes learning accommodations, the root of that can be a mental health challenge as well. So students are encouraged, and I am a big advocate of this, to access counseling services. I really talk about that in every single class. I posted on my learning management site with students to really try to be comfortable. If you need the supports you need, especially counseling, like anxiety, and Nabiha talked beautifully about that as well, like really trying to reach out to the counseling services. These are trained professionals in the field who are clinically trained. And so that's the two kind of go together sometimes in terms of learning challenges and mental health challenges. So mental health challenges won't necessarily, I've never seen identified in a learning accommodation, but it's important for us to be sensitive that there could be an intertwining of the two, learning and also mental health.
That's actually the perfect segue into our next question. So how do I know the difference between normal anxiety and anxiety that's getting in the way? I think it's normal to be anxious about an exam, but how much anxiety is too much anxiety?
I guess I'll take that one. I think when it starts to really interfere in your life, it's starting to interfere in your ability to study and to do other things. And you are finding that maybe you are having a lot more of the symptoms than you used to have, right? So I think if there's a gradual increase, that's also something to, maybe like that point is for you to reach out to somebody and get some help. And like my colleagues have talked about, there seems to be a lot of support out there at the post-secondary level.
To also add to that, so when it's like maybe shared when it's anxiety or another concern that's interfering with your ability to be in school, attend school, etc., there's something that students should be aware of as well. So if they feel like they're falling behind and they can't catch up and they're not doing well, they might fail the semester, but they feel like I paid my tuition, I need to push through and make this happen. I've been a program coordinator before for my program, and one thing that you can do as a student who feels like I just think I need to press pause, I cannot continue this semester, but I'm already so deep into it, is really reach out to the program coordinator. There are times where as a program coordinator, I've had to sit with a student and we came up with a plan together. Like I wasn't leading the ship. It was like the student shared with me, what they needed. And I was able to say, okay, these are some of your options. So I had one student where we realized that taking time off from the following semester was very supportive to her. And she said she had no idea. She felt like, I can take time off from a semester. I didn't think I could do that. I'm like, yes, the school will always be here. And if you need to take care of yourself and press pause, very, very important. So really helpful for students if they feel their anxiety or mental health concern is really interfering and it's very pervasive, then I think it's good for them to consider pressing pause and speaking to their program coordinator rather than just quitting the semester and dropping out. I just think it's good to know what your options are and just to step forward and see what helps you can get.
Thanks, Natalie. So I have another question. So someone said, my parents have called me lazy and apathetic, and that's why I'm not going to class, but I really do want to go to class and complete my work. I think something might be wrong. What should I do?
I guess I'll take this one. It's a really, really good question. It sounds like lots is happening. And I think for a student when they're in school, usually you're not doing it on your own. There's often a support system, but for some students, they don't have that support system. And maybe the student is receiving sort of these messages and then they're internalizing the message. This sounds like this person wants to be in school, but these messages from their family is impacting that. So I think perhaps the student should really think, okay, what are my goals? It sounds like they're passionate about the program or being in school. School is something that they're compelled to do. They want to pursue it. I would encourage you perhaps to have some time with yourself first, like just assess the situation, take some time to reflect. And then if it's something where you want to reach out to your program coordinator, have a conversation and say, I'm sort of having these challenges, maybe a lack of support at home, but I want to be here in school. You have to know sort of what is it that you're needing or have a sense of what you might be needing, and then maybe speak to the program coordinator. We don't know if there's counseling supports could be of help to that person. If is it a learning accommodation, that could also be it as well. It's hard to say. But to what Karen said, I think a little while ago, your tuition is paying for so many rich and wonderful services. When I was a student in undergrad, I wish we had half of these services. And I tell my students that all the time. So many amazing services. So take advantage of them. And so the student may just need to say, okay, let me speak to a program coordinator, share what's going on, and then that coordinator might be able to lead them to some services to support them on what could be a challenge now, but they need that support to kind of walk through that.
Thanks, Natalie. Karen, you have something to add?
Yeah, just to say, it sounds like this student actually wants to be at school, and that's very positive and should really, be something to build on in terms of what they want to achieve and what they think their goals are, as opposed to anybody else in their life. So that's a great, wonderful place to start, and to take that, and as Natalie says, just sort of build on that and look for the right support so that they can be as successful as they can be.
Thanks, Karen. So the student has received supports at this point. They're working on some self-care. They're doing things on their own. Nabiha, I really liked how you talked about some of the strategies, like belly breathing. Can you explain what that's about a little bit more?
Sure. So I didn't know this, so I don't know if everyone else does, but normally when you do take a belly breath, when you're taking that breath in, your belly is actually supposed to expand out versus go in. And I didn't really know that until a couple of years ago. So that's one of the first things I tell clients who might be having like a panic attack or are feeling a lot of anxiety, is just to get grounded in the moment by taking those deep breaths. There's different resources out there that can help you to like hold your breath in for 4 seconds and then let it out for 4 seconds. So using different tools like that to help you with the breathing can be really helpful as well.
Thanks, Nabiha. Okay, so I have one last question from a student. Sorry, my dog is just, somebody must be here. So I was used to my teachers caring about me in high school, but now that I've graduated, I feel like my professors don't know me or care about me. It's weird and a little lonely. It's important to me to know that my professors are invested in me. What can I do?
Very good question. Like all these questions are really wonderful. That's a tough spot to be in. And I talked about it like I said earlier, like there's no manual on like college or university 101 after high school. I think for many students, when I think back to my own experience in high school, it was many, many, many years ago. It's more, you feel more community, like you're with a cohort for, well, no, back then it was OEC. So there you go, many years ago, but 5 years together if you're at the same high school. So it's smaller classes, you feel more connected. And so I know it feels like such a bigger world when you're in post-secondary, and depending on what school you're going to and even what program you're in, some programs, like you'll walk into a class of like a couple hundred students, you feel like such a small person in this big mammoth of like a classroom. So that can be really difficult. I'm at a college, so it's more of a community feel. So at university, it might be very different. I think one thing a student can do is if they want to connect with their professor, and it's maybe not so much to say the professor, it may seem like the professor doesn't care, but maybe they just haven't had an opportunity to know you, especially if it's one professor to how many students. And sometimes some classes, there's a TA, a teacher's assistant. So then the professor seems a little bit more distant. I think one thing, if you're really wanting to create a connection with the professor, send them an email, introduce yourself, right? And just say, my name is, I'm in your class, maybe remind them which class, because they could have multiple, and just say, this is my name. I just wanted to know if I could meet with you, just to introduce myself, and if I can learn a bit more about you and, about the course. I think that would be a really good first step. I would have a hard time believing a professor would decline the offer. I'm confident that professors would actually love that opportunity to get to know a student who's actually reached out. That student will probably stick out in their mind like, oh, this is a really great email. Someone wanted to get to know me and wants me to get to know them. So it might seem a little bit scary, but it'll be worth it. I believe very much so it'll be worth it. So trying that can create that connection for wanting to meet. If it's an online course, asking to meet, they do telephone calls, do they have, especially their office hours, find out their office hours. Every professor has office hours, and even meeting virtually. So for myself teaching online, I actually asked a student, would you like to meet by telephone or virtually? I do Zoom meetings all the time with students. It's so nice to have that interaction. So I think taking that leap of faith and using those skills and connecting with your professor, I think it would be a pleasant surprise for them. And I think you might be pleasantly surprised as well. It's worth a try.
Karen?
Yeah, just kind of add to that. I've always liked it when students have reached out to me by email, and I always respond because I know what it must feel like. And, just meeting with a professor after class. So I also teach a virtual class. And so, after class, there are usually a few students that are waiting. Great way to connect, even if it's about the course, but making yourself known. And knowing that you can kind of reach out. I think that there are a lot of professors, but also I would add this one thing, to, not look at it as needing to have a relationship that way with all your professors. It may be a select few, and that's okay. So I think kind of, even if you have a great relationship with one or two, but not exactly thinking that it would be the same way for all, might be really helpful.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, so if anyone else has anything to add. Okay, so thank you guys for answering those questions. I'll pass it back to Tesla.
Thank you, Kelsey. Maybe before I share some closing remarks for our three esteemed panelists, is there any last words of advice or wisdom or inspiration that you have for students who are navigating new environments, new changes, or just the regular changes that come with the school year? Maybe we'll start with Nabiha.
I'm just going to go along with a lot of the messages that my colleagues have said. Be compassionate towards yourself, remember that this is a new environment and, you're doing your best, and that's all you can really do, right? So to remember that.
Thanks for that, Nabiha. Karen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, you're not alone. And that you can still succeed even if you are experiencing stress in your life. And that's always a good thing to remember.
Thank you, Karen. And Natalie?
I think students should really realize they're blessed to be at school. And this is a great opportunity. Everyone knows their journey on how they got to college, university, maybe their struggles, the challenges, the joys, the triumphs. Remember that, and that this is a new phase in your life, a new chapter in your life. And it's an adventure. It's going to have its ups and its downs. And this is really preparing you and bolstering you for your future career. And so really just put one step in front of the other, and try to connect with people. And there's a saying I love, I'm going to read it from my wall. Life always begins with one step outside of your comfort zone. And I'm a quote person. I say quotes a lot in my class, and just like out of your comfort zone, do maybe something small that's a bit out of your comfort zone. And then you'll realize, you know what, I can keep doing this. And for all of us here, I'm sure like post-secondary has probably one of the most pivotal and really long-lasting memories of who we are today. So enjoy the experience.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you all again for being here with us. Thank you to those who have come and attended to learn. Hopefully, you have learned something out of this experience. Before we wrap up, just a couple of things about the services offered at Silm Center for Mental Health. So, we've talked today a lot about learning accommodations. Some of the things that Silm Center for Mental Health offers include psychoeducational assessments. So, those are for individuals who are wondering whether they have a learning difference, a learning disorder, whether they have attention deficit hyperactivity or ADHD disorder. So we can do that type of assessment. Accommodations also do exist for individuals who are struggling with their mental health. The way a professor sees it is very much as a learning accommodation because they are your professor. They're the ones teaching you. And so what they're going to be able to offer is in relation to learning. But we do offer psychological assessments as well. One of the things that a lot of students don't know is that if you are eligible for OSAP and you're in Ontario, the government may actually cover the bulk of the cost for an assessment. And so, as many of our panelists mentioned today, talk to your professors, talk to your accessibility services to understand what you can access, how you can access it, and know that there might be some financial support as well as that emotional and learning support available to you. Counseling is also a great way to manage some of the changes and tricky situations involved with learning. It's not just about our education at this point, but it's also about our self growth, about navigating interpersonal and peer relationships. It's about figuring out what we want to do with our lives and who we want to be, and knowing that that's allowed to change every single day. And so, if it would be helpful to have someone to talk through some of that stuff with, counseling is a great option. And at Silm Center for Mental Health, as you can see today, we have an incredible team that we are all so lucky to be working with. And we also offer some sliding scale services. So if counseling might be a little bit financially inaccessible to you, reach out to us anyway, and we may be able to help. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in our community. Take good care.